morning, people. I hope you're doing well, my delovelies, but I've gotta warn you. We built this one up special and it really may contain science. Bird science. Every so often, I have to restore the humility of my human audience by reminding y'all that birds are out there being way the heck more impressive than humans give them credit for. Today's star is the wild palm cockatoo. That's a palm cockatoo in the wild. Unfortunately, I couldn't find any record of any species named the well-behaved palm cockatoo in contrast to their wild counterparts. We've featured members of the parrot family on plenty of previous episodes of May Contain Science because they're, to use a technical term, wicked smart. We've seen them make tools to make other tools, and we've seen them use our tools, specifically our iPads, to make video calls over FaceBeak. But for the most part, Bird uses tools. Stories go a little something like this. Bird figures out tool and manipulates it in some complicated way in order to get tasty treat. Even when we taught them to use iPads, the learning process was initially reinforced with tasty treat. In fact, most of the examples of tool use we've seen in birds, particularly the rare examples seen in the wild, have been for foraging/snacking purposes with a few uses for grooming. One must be one's most stylish bird self, after all. But this latest article in the Proceedings of the Royal Society in Biological Sciences is a completely different case. Wild palm cockatoos make percussion instruments. They make musical instruments. Birds are perhaps the most musical class of animal. In fact, 4,000 different bird species are part of the suborder Passerii, the songbird suborder. Songbirds typically have identifiable, learned songs with complex rhythms, and they sing those songs so consistently that changes to a songbird's rhythm is enough to pique scientific interest all on its own. But the point is that they are capable of internalizing and performing calls that, at least to a human musician, are tonally and rhythmically interesting and complex. And those musical skills are associated with other cognitive abilities. Another recently published study in the journal Science recently revealed that songbird species that display more complex vocal learning are better problem solvers and have larger brains. So, it might make sense then if we saw this tool-using percussive behavior from established musicians like songbirds. But the parrot family are not members of the songbird group. Like many non-songbirds, parrots may not have the full musicianship, but they're still quite vocal. And parrots do have a syrinx, the vocal organ that in songbirds is used for songs, but in parrots is what makes them capable of mimicking human speech. Yes, music is different than speech, or everyone on the debate team would be a star vocalist, but like songbirds learning tunes, the parrot family's capacity for mimicry speaks to their ability to internalize and recreate complex, nuanced sounds, just a different sort of sound than songbird tunes. So, since parrots like the cockatoo have strong cognitive problem-solving abilities, and parrots like the cockatoo do show some auditory proficiency, maybe it's not that parrots can't be musical, but rather that music simply hasn't been a part of parrot culture. Or, again, most parrot cultures. Let's get into the details of this cockatoo concert. There were 2 different instruments favored by our palm cockatoo musicians: seed pods and drumsticks. Drumsticks are far and away the most popular choice, with 89% of our musicians utilizing them, but that does include some cockatoos who made both types, and you'll have both types of instrumentalists in the same region, indicating this isn't just a drumsticks to the north, seed pods down south sort of phenomenon. In both cases, the performance involved rhythmically tapping the seed pod or stick against a tree limb or hollow trunk. The authors note that the birds usually used their left foot to hold their instruments, and okay, while I don't have any particular conclusion to give you from that information, it's just a cool detail for neuroscientists who are interested in lateralization of brain function, or brain-sidedness, if you will, which apparently is still in birds and still shows up in this musical display. Okay, and I realize they rhythmically hit the stick on the tree trunk doesn't sound impressive on its own, but previous work from this research group has showed that drumming by palm cockatoos features regular beat production, repeated components, and individual musical styles that combine their drumming and vocalization. Very unlike songbirds, where everyone in a given species will pretty much sing the same tune. There's nothing in this that is substantively different than a human instrumental music production. That is a bird performing instrumental music. We've known about palm cockatoos and their drumming for a while, but the custom instrument construction is what's new science here. In order to count as making musical instruments, the birds actually do have to mod the plant parts rather than pick them up and use them as they find them, and yes, they do. Our palm cockatoos change the shape of seed pods by shaving them down, and they make their drumsticks by cutting a tree branch and trimming it down to size, and that gets to one of my favorite parts of this story. Each bird has individual sound preferences for the instruments they produce. In humans, we could hypothetically customize the sound of our instruments to our individual preferences, and to a small extent we do. A Fazioli piano has a different tone quality than a Bösendorfer piano, at least to a musician. It's one of those things where you might not hear the distinction, but maybe instead you can immediately tell the difference between the sound of a high-end computer keyboard versus a cheap one, or you can tell well-made acrylic dice from mass-manufactured math rocks with no quality control. A lot of us have some areas where we can tell the difference between things that seem identical to non-experts, and ultimately, that's kind of the way it is with most human musical instruments. The tiny details might vary, but in general, one oboe is intentionally pretty interchangeable with another oboe. So the music of a concert is not beholden to the sound preferences of any particular oboist. But these palm cockatoos aren't so stodgy. When they make their drumsticks, each individual tends to recreate their preferred design. Not just visually in a they make the stick the same length kind of way, but to achieve their individual sound preferences. That's an impressive level of specificity in tool use. It's the difference between making a tool to serve a function and making a tool to serve that function the way you want it done. And here's the thing. I said we know they have preferences because they recreate their preferred design, and you might wonder why we know that. How many drumsticks are they making, and why not just keep the first set they like rather than recreate them consistently the same way? My lovelies. Now comes the absolute best part, the performance itself. The instrumentalists here are all male because the music has become part of their courtship display. Stags bash each other with their horns. Birds of paradise perform a ballet dance, and apparently these palm cockatoos court mates through sick drum solos. This musical instrument tool use isn't the only example of courtship through construction. The male satin bowerbird, for instance, creates specialized stick structures decorated with blue, yellow, and shiny objects to attract mates. But the palm cockatoo is the only non-human animal to take two types of courtship display, construction and performance, and combine them into a single musical super ritual. And at the end of all of it, the male will throw their instrument to the ground, either disposing of it entirely or, in the case of some drumsticks, splitting them halfway and integrating the parts into a nest. Collected over multiple years, our researchers were able to see consistency in instrument design, and overall, we're looking at 227 drumsticks and 29 seed pods from at least 13 birds. That's why we know these cockatoos will consistently recreate instruments according to their preferences, because each custom instrument is used for a courtship, then disposed of. Some birds would make more than a dozen drumsticks in a single courtship season. I mean, how do these courted cockatoos even stand a chance in the face of this romance? My gift is my song, and this one's for you. I made this instrument just for you, and no one will ever hear this song on this instrument ever again, because I will make this drumstick into a nest. Into our nest, if you choose me. Be still, my heart. Extremely scientific conclusion? Cockatoos got game.